If you are a member of the subcommittee and you're in a place where it is safe and comfortable for you to do so, we would love to have you on camera. If you are not a member of the subcommittee, we do ask that you leave your camera on until you're addressing the subcommittee. Other than that, we finally, to just administrative norms, we ask that when you speak, you introduce yourself, and that everyone refrain from using the chat, as that can become distracting for all members, and particularly those who are using screen reader or other technologies. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started with what today's agenda is going to be. And part of that is getting very clear on what our work is going to be over the next 3 months. We have spent a lot of time identifying the different barriers to things like running for office, serving in office, being employed in government, working for government, and accessing government services. Let me pause. Shannon, did you have a question for me, or are you talking with the interpreters?
Nope, sorry, we were both interpreting at the same time.
Okay.
So I'm gonna let her go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As I said, we're now at the point where we're pivoting. We spent a lot of time identifying barriers. Members of this subcommittee have identified dozens of potential paths forward to create better conditions. We've heard from a number of panelists and people working in different aspects of government. Now it's time for us to start developing what may be your recommendations. And I want to emphasize may. Here is the process we are going to use. Each of our meetings between now and August is going to go deep into one aspect of our charge. For example, today we are going to focus on our charge to identify and offer solutions to addressing the barriers to running for and serving in office. We are not here today to develop recommendations that we're voting on. What we will be doing is developing a brainstorm list of what might become the recommendations you all put forward. We will then take that short list of possible ideas and have the opportunity to socialize them with stakeholders. We'll post those on Engage Dora and ask people to respond to each of those ideas. We'll also work with all of you to share those ideas with your networks, and the executive committee members. We have Michael Stone from the executive committee and all of the members. Michael Stone is on the phone right now. All of the executive committee members are going to help us spread these ideas. We'll post them on Engage Dora and ask people to respond, not just whether they like the idea, but what do they see as the strengths of each idea's ability to address the barrier? What might be the considerations or implications and other ideas they have? So our goal today, as we talk about barriers to running for and serving in office, is to develop a list, and it's up to you. That may be 5 ideas, it may be 20 ideas that we'll share with stakeholders, get their response to, and at our next meeting, we'll bring back to all of you what that stakeholder feedback was. At meeting number 2, you'll not only hear that feedback, we'll then go into the next charge we have. So at our next meeting, we'll start tackling what are the barriers to working for government. With that being said, I will spend some time reviewing some of the ideas that have surfaced to date, but I want to give members opportunity to ask any questions about the process or the goal of today's conversation. I've got no indications of questions yet, although as always, please feel free to raise your hand visually or using the emoticons or the reactions on Zoom, or just come off mute if you're a member of the subcommittee or one of our interpreters working with our members, and we'll get right into it. As I said, today's focus is on barriers to running for and serving in office. To have this conversation, I'm going to break that into those 2 parts. We're going to spend some time talking about the barriers to running for office, and then we'll talk about the barriers to actually serving in office. Prior to just opening this up for brainstorm, I want to call out a couple of different things, and I'm reading from a list of ideas that have come from all of you over the last few months. Just to jog memories, and I want to be very clear, this is not me advocating for any one of these ideas. It's reminding some of the ideas you all have surfaced. People have suggested that we need to make sure that all paperwork associated with filing to run for office is done in accessible formats and is done in plain language. Some of you have suggested that there needs to be a process to ensure, if not audit, that all rooms for matters like voting, debates and ballots are in accessible locations. Some have suggested that we need to make sure that every voting location is universally accessible. People have talked about the challenges of gathering signatures via ballot or via petition, and that canvassing is a barrier. Nobody yet suggested a specific solution, so we'll talk through that today. People have made the point that a lot of the events may be held in locations that are not accessible. And some members of this subcommittee raised the idea of ensuring that government makes venues available for campaign events that are assured to be accessible. There's another point raised simply about the need to do better education about bias and the education of cultural differences. Folks have suggested, as I mentioned just a minute ago, providing city resources or rooms at rec centers, city halls, and other venues owned by city, county, or state government to allow campaigns to hold events in ADA accessible places. They've also, some of you have suggested ensuring that not only are debates or any town halls held in accessible places, but that the full venue. And I think Councilman Hines, it may have been you that called out that there was one venue where they had one location at one end of a stage, for example, that was accessible, and that itself was something that we should be talking about. Other than that, there was a lot of conversation about educating. I'm going to hold there. Again, those are just a sampling of some of the ideas that you all raised. Mr. Hernandez, you have a question.
I guess, I don't know what, as far as question, I might have interrupted you. I apologize for that. I would like, when it's proper time, to say something about everything that was just mentioned, though.
I'm happy. I am done reading that list, where I'm going to take us for probably the next 20 to 25 minutes is starting to hear from all of you a list of ideas that may be recommendations. I'm going to encourage you, as we do that, to really think about what is the role that government can play in changing the playing field to ensure we're removing these barriers. What elements are we going to be able to enforce, ensure compliance? We will talk about some best practices. I don't want to take that off the table, but we've heard clearly from the executive committee and frankly from all of you that you want to make sure the recommendations have some teeth. They're enforceable and they're able to change the conditions that exist. So with that, Rob, I'll go to you first, and then I'm going to really push every member to offer ideas that we may want to socialize with stakeholders.
Okay, so I would say everything that you hit on, with the exception of canvassing. So let's say voting places. Any time you're going to go debate or bottom line, I keep going back to the government is responsible. There's already a federal law in place. It's called the ADA. It's been around for years, and it's just a matter of each municipality needs to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And in order, how do they do that? They need to establish an ADA program. They need to make sure that they have ADA professionals that are doing this. So an example, here a while ago, Mayor Emmy here has been having a lot of public speaking events throughout the community. And what's happening is we have an Office of Strategic Management that'll collaborate with us, the ADA, to make sure that any event that the mayor's going to be speaking at, if there's someone that has a disability, that we have that announcement made, hey, anybody that needs a reasonable accommodation, please let us know, and we get them. So us as the office, we coordinate that event to make sure that it's accessible. If it's not accessible, then they don't need to be having it there. Okay, bottom line is it's a requirement. So that part is the answer on that is you got to have an ADA program. And you have to have ADA professionals doing what's already required by law.
So okay. Rob, can I push on you a little bit here, because and we'll get to the serving in office, and I know the points you're raising about the mayor apply to running for office. My question for you is, I hear your point clearly, there's ADA requirements. Do you have an idea of a recommendation the state of Colorado may want to consider to strengthen the enforcement of it. Are you suggesting that we put a requirement in Colorado law that any jurisdiction that conducts elections has a designated ADA officer specifically to monitor the election compliance?
I think that's a great idea, because who better than to have a professional that understands the ADA to make sure that that process is this a seamless process as much as possible. The one thing that the coordinator is going to do, they're going to coordinate with the candidates, they're going to coordinate with the venue, they're going to make sure that that area is good to go, whatever the reasonable accommodation is, that's needed.
Great, thank you. And everyone, I want to remind you, when I push for detail or I ask about an example, I'm offering it as a hypothetical. I'm not advocating for any, but my task today is really to get specific and make sure we generate some ideas of what the state of Colorado may want to require. I'm going to go to Councilman Hines, and then to Craig, and then to Shannon.
So my comment is about campaigning. The specific example that happened to me that went viral around the world. The candidate debate I was required to participate in the debate. The debate stage was not accessible for someone in a wheelchair at all. And so I was struggling to get on the stage because I had to participate. The way that happened was that the venue checked a box saying that they were ADA compliant. And that's how the clerk's office somehow got away from the culpability of the full brunt of the ire of the world stage. But does each venue? So one, we could, there's theory and there's practicality, right? The theory is that ADA has been around for 34 years, and everyone should know what the rights and responsibilities are. They should know that ADA exists. They should know what the rights and responsibilities are. But that's theory. In practice, this venue clearly did not know what ADA accessibility is, and so to Rob's point, I'm not sure that he was trying to make the suggestion, but I'm seconding his suggestion rather than have the private venues certify that they're ADA compliant, because we've seen, at least in one very visible case, that they didn't know what they were doing when they checked that box. That the Office of Disability Rights, and that doesn't have to be someone full-time, but that someone should have that title. Maybe they have other hats too, but someone from the cities, or based on the elected office they're seeking, so city or county commissioner or statewide, that particular representative in the government is responsible for the ADA certification instead of the private entity. We just can't trust the entities to do the right thing.
Got it. So just to clarify, for sake of capturing this idea, the idea we may want to socialize would be a requirement that any jurisdiction conducting an election in the state of Colorado must be responsible for auditing and certifying the accessibility of any venues permitted to be used for those campaign debates.
Yeah. So, and I say you're talking about campaign debates. I'm trying to help you be specific. How about official sanction? I'm trying to, like, someone can show up at someone's home all day, right? And that's just a campaign event totally by the campaign. But the city of Denver said you have to participate in this particular debate. So I want to somehow make the distinction of
Understood.
Candidates doing whatever candidates are going to do is one thing, but if the city requires candidates to do certain things, then it is on the city's responsibility, or the legal entity, the governmental entity's responsibility to certify that whatever venue is fully accessible and should bear the brunt should there be any inaccessibility.
So we're putting the requirement, and I'll get some language cleaned up and check it with everyone, but again, for any jurisdiction conducting an election for any required event or event sanctioned and held by that jurisdiction, we would require them to be responsible for ensuring the accessibility of that venue.
Yeah, and I'm trying to be reasonable, right? I mean,
Yep.
we can't make every campaign whistle stop, ADA compliant. We can't also require every jurisdiction to certify all of those whistle stops.
Yep.
But if the city's going to require, or the entity is going to require something, then they should be on the hook for that certification.
Understood. Thank you, Councilman. Let me go to Craig and then to Shannon.
Hi everyone, this is Craig. I definitely agree with Rob and Councilman Hines on both of those points, and I really love the the idea and the need for better enforcement for ADA, and the audits are essential. And I did want to expand a little bit because I think it's really important to have ADA coordinators for these locations, as Rob was referring to. But I think it's also important, and something we could do in policy, to make it mandated that there has to be a singular ADA coordinator, and they can't share that title with other responsibilities in organizations. We see a lot in our counties and municipalities that ADA coordinators are usually share the responsibilities as a risk management person. And I think risk management and ADA coordination sometimes come in conflict with each other because they're not the same thing. And looking at people with disabilities and accommodations is not mitigating risk, it's enforcing civil rights. And I think those two roles come in contrast all too often. So I think it would be beneficial for our community to make sure those roles aren't combined and there's misaligned incentives of those roles competing.
And Craig, I'm just checking for clarification. If I'm hearing you right, that may be something that is not only addressing running for and serving in office, but the broader government services. Just so I'm clear, you're suggesting a specific individual identified as the ADA compliance person for the jurisdiction for all ADA compliance. You're not talking about an individual just for election ADA compliance.
Correct. I was taking what Rob was referring to, and it just kind of got me thinking about how that role of ADA coordinator needs to have a specific job, and those responsibilities shouldn't be shared with another role such as risk management or risk mitigation, which in my mind are two separate things and could be in conflict with one another. And I think that would play a big role with an ADA coordinator whose job it is to help enforce ADA requirements during audits at locations for campaign events and things like that.
Understood. I'm going to go to Shannon, then Councilman Hines, and then Rob, back to you. And again, we're really trying to get specific on what the state may want to require relating to the running for office section. And in a little bit, we'll get to the serving in office. Shannon, your thoughts?
Hold on one second. Hello, my name is Shannon. Go ahead. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. My name is Shannon. I do agree with you, Rob, and I agree with you, Craig, and I also agree with you that at this point, the problem that we're having right now in the proceedings is that we're not specific enough in determining the different roles and the different positions. And as far as ADA, looking at accessibility, we are not 100% accessible. And so as far as having interpreters, even for an example, that is not 100% accessible. The situation that we are facing right now, if you go back a bit, I think it would be fair to say as an example, that office that they're running for specifically, they need to provide coverage for the local jurisdictions as far as accessibility, and they have to be on a neutral platform. So regardless of who's running, they need to come together and work together. And my hope is that the goal would be accessibility. And so first and foremost, I believe that that's the most important priority. And the second one, as far as running for running for the ADA position and accessibility in that field, is can that person use their abilities, their role to have those important conversations to make sure that the accessibility piece is happening and that people are not being taken advantage of, and that spaces are not being taken advantage of, and that we are holding people in places accountable for being accessible. So those would be my two top things for somebody who is running for the election in the state.
Thank you. Shannon, I would like to follow up with you to make sure I don't
Shannon.
lose anything. You made a mention to interpreters there. And so I wanted to clarify, in addition to what's
And
required
I'm a little
by,
biased. I'm a little biased about the interpreters. I'm not going to lie, because that's something I need for accessibility.
yep, I want to make sure, in addition to enforcement of the ADA and of Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act, are there additional requirements you would suggest we consider for any jurisdiction, whether that's city, county, or state, conducting an election for providing interpreters at any mandatory or sanctioned events?
Sure. As far as interpreters go, it's a long process. And people have a lot of disabilities. They have a need of elevator as opposed to stairs. So it's not just interpreters. You have to request an interpreter ahead of time. They have to be licensed. They have to be certified. They're all the things that they have to be for the state. So that in itself is something that presents a bit of a challenge as far as requirements and requesting and the procedures that go into that. Not everyone is aware of what those are. So that is absolutely essential that people are, interpreters are not free, elevators are not free, these kinds of things for accessibility purposes have a lot of things that go along with them. And it's important that the person running for a city, state, etc., is aware of these things and what it entails.
Thank you, Shannon. Let me go to Councilman Hines, then Rob Hernandez, and then Craig.
Hi, Chris Hines, and I apologize for not giving my name last time. I have a question for Craig, so that I understand the ask. I think, and this is for clarification. I'm not trying to put my opinion in this. You were saying that, if I understood it correctly, every municipality should have a dedicated ADA coordinator that has no other hats. And if that's the case, really small towns, is the suggestion that they should hire one person whose only job is ADA coordination? And if so, is that there might be a financial burden? Are you saying that it doesn't matter, they should do it because it's the right thing to do? I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you for the follow-up. This is Craig. I think we need to be aware of potential financial burdens to smaller municipalities and cities. But I think that's a separate issue that would need to be talked about specifically during implementation. But yes, I do think that it's important to have one person who has the role of ADA coordinator without wearing other hats that could be in conflict of that role of ADA coordinator and equal access. And through experience, and my experience is biased as well, I've experienced firsthand that when the risk management hat gets put on with ADA coordination, it kind of becomes defensive, where they're trying to protect their entity or establishment from a lawsuit, as opposed to trying to help the individual have access and equal rights. And that's why I think those two roles come in stark contrast and need to be separated.
So are you saying one person should not hold those two hats? Or are you again saying should be one person who is the ADA coordinator and nothing else? Like, I totally get the conflict of interest there. So yeah. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess if we get really, I would love to have one person and only have that job. But I guess if there were other roles that they needed to have that weren't in conflict, we'd have to decide what could be. But I do think that I would love to see one person have that role, and that it's a big enough role that would fulfill, like, one person would need to do it. So I get what you're saying, but yeah, ideally I would love to see one person in that role only, just to answer that.
Thank you.
Craig, I appreciate you clarifying and providing the background for it. I also want to remind everyone, we're going to go stakehold and socialize these ideas. There will be, I expect, plenty of folks who will push back on many ideas. So I'm going to encourage all of you to be aspirational and not do your opponent's work in watering down ideas, but to set the bar high for now. Craig, since you already had your hand up, I want to continue with you. Then I'll go to Rob, then Representative Ortiz. I want to invite you in as our vice chair and one of our electeds. And then Shannon, I'll come back to you. But Craig, you had your hand up earlier with an idea, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. This is Craig again. And this was just as I was thinking when Shannon was speaking about interpreters and places being truly accessible, is I think there's room to create more transparent and streamlined process for requesting accommodations for events. I think it's sometimes difficult and maybe intentionally hidden that people can request accommodations. And I think that needs to be a process that's kind of written in stone that is followed universally everywhere, of requirements of the process of requesting accommodation. So it's easy to find, it's visible, people know what their rights are, and they're able to make these requests so that it's not a complicated process. And therefore more people can have access to the accommodations they need easier.
And Craig, this is just again me clarifying for purposes of being able to write these up and share them out. But would I be correct in intuiting your suggestion would be that any jurisdiction conducting an election in Colorado provide in an easy to find place where other election and candidate information is shared, information about accessing those accommodations?
Correct, and for that to be consistently followed across the entire state.
Great, thank you. Let me go to Rob and then Rep Ortiz and then Shannon.
Hi, Rob Hernandez. To Craig's point, so there are two different types of ADA coordinators, and that's defined by the DOJ. Title I, which is employment, which means that anything that an employee needs because of a disability, a reasonable accommodation has to be, there needs to be an effort to make that possible. Title II is the big one. And I say the big one because that's what I do. That's what my office does. We handle everything else that you can imagine public facing. So effective communication, that's very broad. Web accessibility, ASL, captioning, etc. Right? You have elections. We have the obligation to, or the responsibility to go out and make sure that all the election places are accessible, from the ballot box to the parking to the path to the entrance, everything. Access to programs and services. We do all the above. Okay. As far as having a dedicated, like for small towns, I've actually done advisement, like say Manitou Springs, 54 employees. Yes, they're expected to have an ADA coordinator because they were so small. When I said, you need to designate one of you to be, I told the mayor, one of your staff members needs to be an ADA coordinator. And I provided training, had them go off and get the certification. Of course, that person wore 3 hats, but you have to remember the size of the town, and there's only 54 employees, and the DOJ is okay with that. But the thing is, you have to have that representation. You have to have that person that is trained. And that's what that ADA coordinator does. They get the training, the experience, so that they know how to approach and handle all these different situations. All this is already there. Like I said, it's already there to know how to go in and to provide a reasonable accommodation, because there's so many unique situations that arise daily in my office, okay? And like I said, for instance, Mary Amy's going to be talking to a couple of schools, and because it's the city that's doing this, we're making sure, I'm sending my staff out to make sure that everything is met as far as accessibility goes. And in one case, we ran into where we're going to have to loop it. We have portable loop systems to make sure that persons that are hard of hearing are going to be able to participate, whatever the case is. But yeah, that's where that ADA coordinator is critical. If you get the coordinator in place, you're going to this is going to start happening. The problem is municipalities across the United States haven't been doing that. The DOJ is now holding them accountable.
Rob,
So-
I apologize for interrupting. I want to make sure that we keep moving forward and
Mhm.
really keep us for the next 20 minutes focused on specific things you think the state may want to consider requiring when it comes to the running for office portion of this.
Okay, being that, like Councilman Hines said, if a government entity is going to sponsor something, okay, then they should make sure that it's accessible, bottom line. And how do you do that? By having a professional ADA coordinator going out and evaluating it. It's very simple.
Understood. We will include that in the ideas. Let me get to Representative Ortiz and then Craig next.
Thank you. I really appreciate, Barrick, the push to let's be aspirational in the solutions that we're doing, because through the stakeholding process, things are going to change. We also need to be aware of the possibilities, though, when it comes to what might be intelligent and what might be passable. So, like, right off the top, when I'm talking about, I completely agree with Craig that the number one rule law is that those two people can't be the same thing. Anytime there's a conflict of interest, full stop, dot period, those people cannot hold the same roles. Like, that can be something you blanket across the state, regardless of the size of the city or the county. I think the next thing is we can talk about phasing in and starting immediately, where every county in the state must have their own dedicated ADA officer that can then be a resource to all their municipalities. Another building could be the top 3 most populous cities in the state must have their own right off the bat. And then we can talk about another option or opportunity is that, and because it's then going to be based on population, that every congressional district, the most populous city, on top of that, that every most populous city in every congressional district must have its own coordinator as well. So you're creating a lot of opportunities to start. And then maybe the ideal is eventually every city should have one. That could be something that you set as a mission statement that you're not mandating, where it's like they shall have one, it's they should have one, right? So and I'm thinking with the policy hat on it, how bills are written and how this can be done, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Really appreciate that. And I will, before we pivot into the serving, I'll remind folks of some of the other ideas we talked about at the very beginning, because folks were talking about making sure paperwork is accessible. We just heard about making sure that where information is distributed, the ability to access accommodations is simple and easily accessible. Let me go to Shannon and then to Craig.
Hi, this is Shannon again, Shannon Callahan. Thank you for hearing me. I would like to follow up on what you just mentioned, Representative, as far as having an ADA coordinator, as opposed to having somebody that sets up from beginning to end the accessibility piece. My concern always is, being sued, having lawsuits because we're not accessible. So mandating that somebody is going to be in charge of that and we have that position might prevent some of those things technically from going on. Some of the lawsuits, if you have somebody in charge, and I think it's really important to do that before the vote even happens. I think this is something that the representative was just discussing. We don't want to follow up and be behind the 8 ball. We want to be in front of it. And so I feel like, yes, this election is important, that we have to have these things. We don't want to play catch up. I think exactly what you just said, Representative, is really, really important, that we are mandating it, and then we're, shoulding and willing and have to, those sort of things is very important prior to make sure it's accessible to vote in the first place.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Representative Craig.
Hi, this is Craig. Yeah, just one more point on that with, more reliance on ADA coordinators. I think it's really important with this work to increase the training and thoroughness of the training for ADA coordinators. Because Rob, I love that your ADA coordinators are very trained and know their stuff, but I've all too often dealt with ADA coordinators that don't understand what Title II ADA centers are and what they're responsible for, or even know what that means when I say Title II ADA center. So I think as we're increasing just their role and importance, especially with regard to elections and elected officials, and having them be the people that help do these audits, we need to make sure that their training is thorough and complete so that we're actually entrusting them and they know their role in what they're doing. I think there's a gap again from Councilman Hines' point to kind of theory to practice, where in theory, the ADA coordinator should know all of people's rights and accommodations processes, but in practice, that's not how it's working when you actually are having these conversations and trying to make accommodations requests. So I think there's a gap in what we expect from an ADA coordinator and from Title II of the ADA and our rights to what we're receiving as citizens and constituents. And there's a big gap in the reality of what that looks like when you request an accommodation or think a place has been audited to ADA standards. We're not getting what we should be getting with regard to our rights from the ADA.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to go to Chanda and then to Rob. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to pivot us to the serving in office piece of this, and we're going to get really specific and aspirational again. I also, as you hear from Chanda and Rob, there's a piece that I brought up that you all had identified this spring about the challenges of the signature gathering process. And we've identified it as a barrier. I just want to name, we haven't talked about any potential solutions you all want to consider. So I want to put that on the table, but independent of that, Chanda and then Rob, what are you guys thinking about?
This is Chanda. I just wanted to kind of address maybe the potential pushback that we might get from having those coordinators, as we had talked about, whether financial or in rural communities where whether the scope of what they do is so limited amongst how much time, pay, whatever could be available within that community. And I think that there are plenty of other components in which we could add to their job description, such as other audits of various other places that we talked about when it comes to providing service, like in the government service section of this, of the work that we're doing. As we talked about having monitoring and audits of that, it doesn't mean that those individuals can't be then tasked with auditing health clinics and providers and such, is to add on to that component. So I know it's not a normal component to it or a scope of work that they would normally do, but if we get pushback on them not having enough to do, it's like, well, then let's make sure that they're doing more, and that could be an extra area.
And Chanda, I appreciate that. And what I'm going to offer now is in no way pushing back on your idea. It's to clarify the process over the next couple of months. I think it is important that if we know something is going to be majorly problematic, you all talk through that, such as Rep. Ortiz talking about ways that you may phase it in, starting at county and then most populous municipalities. What we are going to be doing is taking all of your ideas, hopefully really aspirational ones, and going out to the field and getting their objections. We'll then bring their objections and their areas of support back to all of you so you can think about them and say, well, we heard this pushback, and either we think that's nonsense and garbage, we don't care, or we hear that and we're going to modify this here. So I just want to note that as part of our process, but I appreciate your point that there may be an opportunity to combine some different pieces as part of our overall work.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to it is not so much to maybe accommodate them, but to make sure that the other parts of what is required under ADA are getting taken care of and monitored and audited according to compliance. So it's really more from a greedy perspective, but giving them more to do would be, if that's what they're going to potentially come back with.
Thank you. I love that strategy. Let me go to Rob and then Councilman Hines.
Rob Hernandez. I'll make it very brief. So the DOJ has a requirement. It is mandatory that you will have an ADA coordinator, that you will have a program. Okay. So that is literally shall. Okay. And there is a number of employees that you have to have in order to, make that a shall. But the thing is one, I'll touch on what Craig said real quickly. He mentioned that there are ADA coordinators that have the title, but they're not well trained. And one of the things is, I run into that all the time. I get calls weekly in my office from different cities and counties, and they're asking a lot of questions, and I know that they're not trained, and that's why they're calling me. So I usually point them, hey, you need to get your certification. If you don't have it, You need to talk to your leadership. The DOJ wants you to have a certification, and it requires, you know, a lot of training. This weekend, I'm headed to the ADA Symposium in Minneapolis for 4 days. That's training all day long. So with that, I'll close. And normally when I hire somebody that applies for the position and they have a good amount of experience, but I hire them and if they don't have that certification, I say, you will have the certification within 6 months. But I have a robust office enough to be able to provide extra training to go that route. But it is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Hines.
Thank you for bringing up the signature gathering point. Since we're being aspirational, I think allowing online signature gathering or digital signature gathering makes a lot of sense. I never log into anyone else's banking information. I never log into anyone else's healthcare information. Somehow we have a secure system for you know, a lot of things. I recognize that there are inherent concerns about digital collection, but you know, we're able to solve it for other industries. Why not this one?
Appreciate it. So the recommendation is for digital signature gathering as part of the petition process, in addition to what we know with some legislation recently passed related to the caucus process. A couple of reminders. We are scheduled for public comment in 33 minutes. If you're a member of the public that would like to address us, please drop a chat. This is the only time I'll ask that, to Carrie Steele or myself, Merrick Abramson. If I don't see public comment requests, I'm going to use the time to continue this conversation. So drop that in there. In a few minutes, I'd like to shift us to the serving in office, but I want to make sure we have all ideas on the table right now that for, in addition to what I read at the start of the meeting that you all had raised, any additional specific ideas. Again, let's be aspirational, enforceable, and implementable ideas to require from the state. Mr. Ortiz.
Thank you, Barrick. This is Representative Ortiz. Just want to put this as a thought out there that the state party, when they contract with software or anything else, that they must include in their contract that they understand that the software company that they're contracting with understands that because of the ADA and because of the Colorado protections, that they must too make their software accessible. Because people with disabilities not being able to use VAN or not being able to use ActBlue or not being able to use all these other tools, and I'm just speaking as a Democrat from what I've used before, not being accessible is a barrier for people with disabilities running for office. And then think of a phasing in point to where they then are not allowed. If there is an accessible option out there, they must contract with that one. They're not allowed to contract with anybody else if they're not accessible. So just ideas, throwing that out there.
Thank you very much. And this is where I'm going to get a little careful on procedure. We've heard an idea put out. The ideas we will be socializing to stakeholders will be those from the subcommittee. Do I have any member of the subcommittee who would like to suggest that one of our solutions is requiring that the state parties require any of their software or other vendors to offer accessible solutions for any candidate running for office? Craig?
This is Craig. Yeah, I'd like to recommend that.
Thank you. Shannon, did you have an additional thought here?
Yes. So again, I just wanted to mention regarding the groups we were talking about, the Democrats and Republican. It's not run by government. It's very open. So, you know, you have these groups that are independent from the government, and then all these voting issues that are under the government. So where exactly in the rules does it say that the parties themselves are required to have all these things and accommodations included? Like, where in the party is it saying that, or where do we need to make sure that it's being said? Because right now it seems like there's nothing established at this time. So
Understood.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're reminded of that.
Thank you. And while I'm not a lawyer and all of our ideas will undoubtedly ultimately make their way in front of Ledge Council, we do have a legislator with us. So Rep. Ortiz, I don't know if you want to weigh in on your view of the state's ability to regulate elections and particularly the actions of our parties.
It is absolutely our purview to regulate businesses, to regulate nonprofits, to regulate any organizations that exist within our state. So that is not a barrier. We absolutely have the right. We've done this, for example, in allowing ranked choice voting. That's a direct way that the state has impacted election law here in the state. I've done this in passing a ballot access law that allowed those that are print disabled to use the UCAVA online voting system. Like, this is absolutely in our purview, and we absolutely have the right to regulate political parties that want to be a political party in good standing here and not be sued by state law. So that is absolutely within our purview and something that we can do.
Thank you. Rob, I'm going to give you the last thoughts on this piece for this block. We'll continue the conversation as well.
Well, I think Representative Ortiz just said it right there. Fully agree that there's no reason why we cannot do that, and it should be.
Great. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to move us to the section of our conversation now about serving in office. Carrie, you all have seen Carrie's meticulous hundreds of pages of notes over the last 5 months. She's been taking those kind of notes of this conversation. After today's call, we will clean up a lot of those notes with your specific ideas, share them back out to you to make sure we capture them correctly. My goal is going to be over the next 10 to 12 days, we have those cleaned up and ready to share on Engage Dora and with stakeholders, but we'll check to make sure we got our language and our notes correct on that. What I'd like to do now is shift the conversation to what are the barriers and then the solutions that are enforceable, actionable, and implementable when it comes to serving in office. And when we talk about serving in office, that's everything from our towns and cities to our counties and states and every aspect of it. That may include the activities and daily movements or behaviors and obligations of the elected official. It may relate to the staff that they have or accommodations that would be necessary for them. This could include anything from accessible buildings to the support of staff or the location that events are held. So with that very broad charge and the discussion, we started this all off with of your ideas. Let's get into some very specific things the state may want to consider requiring when it comes to removing barriers to serving an elected office. And I'll go to Craig first and then Shannon.
Thank you. This is Craig. Yeah, I think it'd be smart and save us a lot of work to use House Bill 23-1308, which Carrie reminded us to review prior to today, where a lot of these great action items are already articulated and outlined pretty nicely. And I think that everything that's listed on there, from auxiliary aids and services down to accessibility of meetings of public body spaces and state capitol building accessibility requirements, are all things that need to be addressed, and we can use some of the language that's articulated here to kind of help inform where we go, even though this piece of bill was withdrawn.
I appreciate that. And just again, for clarification, the proposal I'm hearing from you, Craig, is we take each item of requirement from 1308 that relates to running for or serving in office, and we incorporate each one of them as one of the ideas we socialize with stakeholders. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, I think maybe not verbatim where we could look at them as a committee, but I think we can use them as guiding points because they're already clearly barriers that have been identified and acknowledged. So I think a lot of that work is there for us, just so we're not starting from scratch on a lot of these things, where we can use some of the language in reference to accessibility requirements for the state capitol, for example.
Then with your permission, what Carrie and I will do is take 1308, extract what seems to be the intent, and bring them back to all of you in plain language for us to go socialize with stakeholders, all of those elements.
Correct, yes.
Great. Let me go to Shannon and then Rob.
Just give me one moment to pin. One moment, please. Nope. I'm trying to pin. One second. Sorry, I can't pin. We'll just go ahead anyways. Go ahead. Not sure why not. Okay, this is Shannon again. Oh, 1 second. I lost him. I'm sorry. This is my fault. Is the interpreter. This is pin. Go. I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Okay, this is Shannon again. So I'm just curious. I would like to ask both of you, Representative Ortiz, related with the election office and the budget, is that money paying for accommodations? Is it paying for staff? Is it paying for, what is that money paying for? I'm just curious, that money that we have, I'm actually not sure about that specific line item in the budget. And I would just like to know, is it maintenance? Is it upgrades? What is that money set aside for specifically as it relates to this?
Barrick, if I'm understanding your question correctly, are we moving back to elections and not talking about serving in office now? Are you still wanting to go back to that perspective?
Yes.
Okay, and
I mean, I guess I just want to know, if you're already in office, what is that money for? Once you're in office.
What is what money for?
Yes, so I'm just curious. So when we're talking about a person coming in, they get voted in, they're elected, they're excited, they begin the process, and they start to look at the accommodation piece, and then they have to pay for the accommodations. And then what part are they going to be responsible for? Are they aware of what they're getting themselves into? Who would be paying, for example, for the interpreters? Who would be paying for the maintenance or the overhaul or the widening of the doorways or the elevator or all of that type of construction that might need to take place or accommodations that need to take place? Do we already have these rules identified, clearly explained from our prior usage moving forward to the next elected officials? I'm just curious.
It is the entity's responsibility where they serve. So for example, if they serve on city council, for example, like our esteemed council member Chris Hines, then it's up to the city of Denver to be able to pay for that. For me, it was the state of Colorado that had to pay for that. And if they fail to accommodate, then they're the ones on the hook and are liable for lawsuits.
Mr. Ortiz, I'd like to follow up with you, and then Mr. Hines, I'm going to ask you the same question. Notwithstanding what the ADA required, what was your experience of where things were in fact provided satisfactorily to you to address those accommodations? And Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Hines, are there things that you believe we need to further consider requiring?
Yes, I mean, it's still, the state capitol is still not accessible for people with disabilities to this day. The Senate chamber is not accessible. And they went ahead and renovated the entire chamber while I was there. And we're allowed not to think about access, right? Like this is happening in all of our places. And I'm going to stop here to allow Councilmember Hines to speak, but I'll also say, like, I could not chair the committee of the whole or be in certain parts of a committee hearing room because they weren't accessible, right? Like, it is part of our job as a legislator to access our colleagues. That is how you build relationships to get into leadership. And I was relegated up till the end to a single corner or the very back of the chamber because the entire chamber was not accessible. So, and at all levels, and again, like I say this with anger and frustration in my voice, I do want to recognize my colleagues that did push for my access and did fight. I'm not saying that they weren't allies in trying to make this happen, but ADA has been law for 34 years, which is what the purpose of the subcommittee is. We need to preemptively and proactively, one, enforce existing law where it already should be at. And number two, then make moves and recommendations about securing true equity for people running for office and people that are serving in elected office or staff of these different state departments, right? Like PWG, the Workers Guild, and advocating for benefits and pay, they said not one single word about basic access. And when I called them out for that, their response was to put forward a token person with an invisible disability to act as an Uncle Tom to then say, oh, well, we have people that have disabilities and we're still advocating for better pay and benefits. Great, I want you to do that. But if you're not advocating for access, you're not advocating for us.
What I'm going to do is invite Mr. Hines in, and then so Mr. Ortiz doesn't make the specific recommendation. After Mr. Hines speaks, I'm going to float an idea and see if I'm hearing from members correctly about what you may want to consider in requiring, if a government is going to use a building, what level of accessibility it should have if they intend to use it for government purposes. But Councilman Hines, your thoughts here.
Yeah, so I've been I've had the fortune of joining the disability community for 15 years now, a little almost 16. And when I first joined the community, I thought ADA was strong. Everyone followed ADA because it was a huge national law. And I was reticent to hear that there were these they call them drive-by ADA lawsuits. My position has changed over time because ADA has been around for 34 years. And if we're thinking about money, because a lot of municipalities are budget constrained, if you amortize anything over 34 years, the cost becomes far more palatable. So my thought or suggestion is that we require, anytime there's a renovation, that we require something to become fully ADA compliant. So if we were to renovate the Senate chambers, then it would be required to become fully ADA compliant. Here's why that is important. So one would think that's already a requirement, right? No, it isn't. In the city of Denver, if you have a structure and you're not changing the use type and you're not doing a major renovation, and that there's a definition for that, I don't know exactly what it is. But if you buy a structure and it used to be a restaurant and you want to continue it as a restaurant, it can continue to be not ADA compliant. That's news to me. But so I think that this is actually a reasonable recommendation, that anytime there are modifications, even if there's no change in use type, like the Senate chambers was and still is the chambers for the Senate. So I guess it didn't change use type, and I guess they weren't afoul of ADA. I don't know, but this could be state law where any modification, even if the use type does not change, should become ADA compliant.
Thank you, Councilman Hines. And Shannon and Rob, I'm going to get to both of you in just 1 minute. I want to stay on the building physical accessibility and modifications. And those include everything from wheelchair or elevator access to braille signage and other things. We have on the table right now the suggestion from Mr. Hines that any renovation should trigger the requirement for full accessibility. I'm going to put something to the group that I have heard from some of you and from some members in the community. I'm not going to attribute it to an individual, but there has been a suggestion that if any building is used by government to do the people's business and the work of government, they must make that accessible to all. There's been a discussion that maybe there's a time horizon of that. And so I just want to put that without my advocacy for your discussion and consideration as a subcommittee. Should governments, whether town, county, or state, be able to conduct government business in a building where an elected official would have to access it that is not fully accessible? And Councilman Hines, I'll let you jump in, and I'll let anybody else lean in on this question. I just want to make sure we're covering this full scope, from renovations that they decide to renovations you may want to call for.
Yeah, in 2017, the city of Denver entered into an agreement with the Department of Justice where a whole bunch of things were changed. We added curb ramps. Our website was required to come into compliance with for those with vision impairments. Another outcome of that agreement was that we as in the city of Denver would take a comprehensive list of every city-owned structure and identify every ADA imperfection. And so we've done that with the Office of Disability Rights. It took a few years. Now we have a list. The next step was then to create priorities. What we don't have, as far as I know, is any sort of time mandate. So perhaps a suggestion could be any city should be required to, within some period of time, have a list of every city structure. Also, within some period of time, plus a little bit, every ADA deficiency at every structure. Then plus a little bit more, the prioritization of those ADA deficiencies. Where is still kind of up in the air is how long does a government entity have to come into compliance?
And that may be something that after we get some feedback, you all have to develop some thinking on. I'm sure the exec committee who will be following this call will do the same. Chris, I'll keep you off mute and ask you this, and then Shannon and Rob, I'll go to you for your thoughts as well. Some have used historical designation as a deflection from this. Should they be allowed to operate government in a building and say it's a historical site, we can't modify it?
You're asking me, yes?
I am.
Sorry, Chris Hines, I apologize that I forgot again to announce in advance. It's a poor argument. Denver City Hall was built in the 1930s, and we have found ways to make sure that all the floors are accessible. I think the people, the role of government is to serve the people. And if all the people can't access where government happens, then that's not okay. I don't care how new or old the building is. If it is designed to serve the people, it should be accessible to all the people. So I have in my district a school that was built in the 1860s. It is fully ADA accessible. It's the Emerson School at 14th and Ogden. If you want to, you can make it fully accessible. And there are other, it was just the National Historic Trust owns it. And it was a value statement. They wanted to maintain the historic structure of that building, and they wanted to make sure that everyone could see the fabulous history in the building. And so it's a value statement, and people can and have made the statement of preserving history and making sure everyone has access to it.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Shannon and then Rob and Chanda, and I want to recognize I have particularly pressed on building physical accessibility because we went there. I welcome your thoughts on that. I also want to push folks to think about the full set of challenges that we may want the state to take a proactive role in changing requirements relating to the ability to serve in office once elected. And that may be personnel, that may be supports, that may be resources, that may be building modifications, but let's include everything involved in serving in that office. Shannon and then Rob and then Chanda, please.
Okay. Okay, this is Shannon Callahan. I want to thank you all for listening to my comments. I am learning an awful lot here today. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is accommodations and ADA do have their benefits. Renovations and all these things, it's not just for people with disabilities. It's not only for people who need the ADA, it's everyone. So I think we need to have a broader perspective here. Renovations, what they're going to look like and who they're going to apply to, it's not only people with disabilities. These renovations are very important for the general population. Having an ADA coordinator is wonderful for all people, senior citizens, in fact, anyone, people with or without a disability. So I think it's important to keep in mind that if a building is not accessible to one person, it may not be accessible to all people. It's just something to keep in mind that it is important across the board.
Thank you, Shannon. Let me go to Rob and then to Chanda. And again, we're talking about what might the state want to require, want to enforce when it comes to addressing the barriers to serving in office once elected.
Hi, Rob Hernandez. Again, so it is a violation of the ADA if city facility is not accessible. It's already there. and it's been there for quite a while, 1990, right? 1991 was the first set of standards, and you were required to become accessible, make your area accessible within those standards. And then you're in what you call a safe harbor, meaning that once you renovate, from that time on, once you renovate, you have to meet the 2010 standards now. Okay, so that 91 goes away, and now the more stringent standard of 2010 that was signed in office by President Obama now becomes a requirement. Okay, and that's, there's no if or and about that. And the thing is, if you don't do it, then that's where the DOJ can pay you a visit, and then you end up in a settlement. And how they do that is because, well, you get federal funding. So the question was asked, where does that money come from? You know, who, you got to remember, all these city, county, and state governments receive millions of dollars in federal funding. And part of that requirement is that you will use part of that funding to become accessible. Okay, and if you don't, then that's why the DOJ is able to go in and settle with you. That's evaluated, your area should be evaluated, and that's called a transition plan. So the transition plan is where you put a timeline in, how long is it going to take you to remediate all of your deficiencies that you've discovered in your evaluation. That's the purpose of that. You describe, you identify, you detail, you cite, and you explain that how you're going to remove it, and you provide a timeline. Okay, and then so really that's really it. It's the process is there. ADA coordinator. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Shanda, your thoughts on what we may want to socialize and stakeholder and consider recommending when it comes to serving in office.
This is Shanda Hinton, and I'll just apologize in advance because I hear a lot of what we're saying, and for me, unfortunately, I am always not particularly in this space, but I see so much of what we're talking about in this space being applied to some of the other things that we're talking about. So I'm throwing that out there again. If we could just maybe revisit some of these things when we get to government services. And again, I apologize for always having to go there, but I just see so much overlap that I don't want to miss the opportunity to just make that reminder.
Shanda, I very much appreciate it, and I hope you never feel you need to apologize for nudging us along. I think it's a good reminder that hopefully a lot of your recommendations address multiple challenges in how government functions. We do have some time still. Representative Ortiz and Councilman Hines, because you're our two members who have run for office and served in office, I want to push on both of you about the in addition to the accessibility of the buildings or venues where you may be required to discharge your duties. Are there other aspects about your requirements and being able to fully serve, as Rep. Ortiz talked about, being able to chair the whole, that you think we need to think about in terms of accommodations that would seem to be covered by ADA, but maybe we need to get really clear about them? And Councilman Hines, I'll go to you first and then Rep. Ortiz.
Yeah, thank you. Chris Hines, Denver City Council. It is, to Representative Ortiz's point, if I were to ever be elected president of City Council, I could not access that seat. It is up a step. And so if we're considering access, then it seems like every slot should be accessible, not just one desk somewhere. I can only access one desk on the dais. So I have one spot that I can get to. And to Representative Ortiz's point, if I want to try to have, conversations or clarify positions with my colleagues as we're discussing a bill, I don't have the ability to, I physically am obstructed from interacting with them, just the same as Representative Ortiz is. So that access to be sure that you have the ability to interact with your colleagues in a free and unfettered fashion, I think is important. Another comment that I would have is I have to eat and drink, food and water. Rep Ortiz, I'm gonna talk about my own truth. I don't know. You and I haven't talked about this, so I don't know if it's true for you. But this is a demanding job, very demanding role, and meetings are back to back, and you have 30 minutes with a constituent or stakeholder group, and they want 30 minutes. They don't want 28. They don't want to give you the time to go pee because they only have 30 minutes with you. And it took a couple weeks or a couple months to schedule that meeting. And so I have issues with just basic water intake. Like being able to drink water. And I don't want to drink as much as I should because I'm afraid I'm going to pee on myself or have to try to mid-meeting excuse myself for a basic biological break. I'm fortunate enough that the city of Denver chose 29 years after ADA was passed to make one stall in the men's room on the 4th floor accessible for me as someone in a wheelchair. There are no requirements for any one person to or not to use that particular stall, and so it's a bigger stall. People love to use it. I only have one choice on the whole floor. And to pee. So that also factors into whether I want to drink water or not. This is recorded. So I went to the emergency department 10 times last year. I was admitted to Denver Health 4 times in 2023 because of urinary tract infections. So when I was elected in 2019, I asked, there's actually in my office, I'm in my office, that there is a restroom in my office. It's just not accessible. The doorway is too narrow. So no one uses the restroom. And so when I was elected, I asked if I could, we could make modifications for the restroom, and COVID hit and we had budget issues or whatever. But my life literally is being shortened because I don't have access to a restroom. So that is above and beyond ADA. Denver, the city, has made a stall accessible on the 4th floor. So they've meet the minimum standards for the public. Perhaps, and this is a discussion and maybe a suggestion, is that I'm not just a member of the public. This is my office. This is where I work. I'm an elected official, and that I keep going to the hospital because we're at the minimum of ADA rather than ensuring reasonable access is, hurting me medically. And when I'm in the hospital, I can't fulfill my duty to my constituents.
So, Mr. Hines, and I do want to flag for folks, it's 4:14. We do have one public comment that I'm going to get to it in 10 minutes. I'm going to go to Rep Ortiz in a second and then to Craig. Mr. Hines, I'm curious if there is something you think we want to consider proposing on that about an immediately accessible, readily accessible. Do we need to, in Colorado, raise the bar on what a reasonable accommodation is so that you're not having to go down hallways and floors? We have a conversation now. I think whether we can make this restroom that no one is using, we can modify it so that it is accessible. But that was a negotiation that has happened over 5 years. And when I got reelected, I started the conversation again. I said, I'm going to be here for another 4 years at least, if not 8 years. So can we talk about the restroom again? And so I think that if there are a city's number one job is public health, safety, and welfare. If I don't have my own welfare considered in the environment that I use as an elected official, I think that's I think that's very tough. Very fair. We have about 6 or 7 minutes before I've got to get to public comment and closing next steps.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and
Rep
make this.
Ortiz.
Yeah. I'm going to make this very brief. Then I agree 100% with Chris. I've had the same experience. So the subcommittees and the task force overall, your jobs are twofold. One is think of better ways to enforce the floor, which is the ADA. We all know that the ADA is the floor. That's not equity. But like it's not enforceable in effective and efficient ways. Even if that already is the law, I don't want to hear that. Well, Title I this, or Title I that. Like, cool, I hear that, but also it's not happening. So what does this task force do to make recommendations on how to secure that? So that's first part. Agree, had the same experience. Thanks for bringing that up. The other things that I want to talk about is on recommendations is video participation for constituents, because there were two non-disabled folks that tried to bring forward a bill that would mandate at all levels of government video participation by constituents. And then the bill was slapped with $1 million fiscal note, even though they have staff that participates virtually, even though able-bodied staff that participate virtually, even though they have staff meetings where able-bodied staff participates virtually, they have the infrastructure, they just don't want to do it. That's the bottom line, is departments don't want to do it, so they utilize fiscal notes to punish bills that they don't want to implement. And so recommendation needs to be, how do we look at fiscal notes? Two recommendations on this is one, an auditing process, specifically for bills that secure basic rights for people with disabilities. Number one. Number two is a demographic note that can then be added, because at the state capitol, we have 5 demographic notes instead of fiscal notes that we can add to a bill that talk about the positive impact for community of color or the negative impact. And so we need to be able to do that in a limitless way, that if a bill is routed to finance or appropriations or has any fiscal note, then we're automatically allowed to request an audit and or to request a demographic fiscal note. So I want to put that to you guys, because how we do this matters and leads to bills dying and leads to bills passing. And you see it the other way around. When there is a issue that the gov or that leadership in that building want to see happen, they underinflate that fiscal note. And all you have to do is look up news stories on how we've underestimated how much certain programs have cost that have been supported by leadership. So we need to look at that. Outside of the video participation, recommending that, the ways that we look at funding, I also want to talk about a software contracting for staff. There are currently managers that work for the state that cannot manage PTO of their staff and not do one of their critical jobs because the software is not accessible. So the same thing I talked about when it comes to enforcement on software for political parties, that if you are contracting, if the state is contract, that one of the primary considerations must be access for their staff with a disability. And if there is a software program out there that is accessible but is more expensive versus one that isn't, that they have to go with the expensive one. Another recommendation there. I think that is it. So I just wanted, again, to recap, to remind you all that ADA is the floor, and it's your job as a subcommittee to find new ways, because I don't want to hear what already exists. It's not working. So new ways to enforce the floor. And the other thing is, how do we secure equity? Because those are also two different things. And then, so online participation for constituents, contracting for software for staff, how do we audit and look at fiscal notes? And my recommendation is going to be an automatic audit for a fiscal note for a bill that secures basic rights for people with disabilities, and an automatic demographic note.
In the interest of time and procedure here, can I see any hand of a subcommittee member who would like to advance the recommendations suggested by Mr. Ortiz? I see a hand. Here's what I've got to do. We're down to I've got 3 minutes. Rob and then Shannon, I'm going to ask you guys to give me 60 seconds. I've got to get to public comment and next steps then.
In a nutshell, Rob Hernandez, in a nutshell, fully agree with Representative Ortiz. I think you just made me realize something even bigger here. I see why these bills are coming out, and I appreciate that, Representative Ortiz. I thought they might be redundant, but I see your point, and I think he's right. And you asked the question, Barrick, does the bar need to be raised? Absolutely, yes. Because what's there, it's law already, but it's not happening the way it should be. So these bills are good. We need to raise the bar.
I'm hearing that, and I'm hearing very clearly from you all, enforcement on all of this.
Yes, definitely.
We need to strengthen that. Shannon, I apologize. I've got to give you 60 or 90 seconds for a lightning round so I can move us along.
Ready to go. Hello, this is Shannon Callahan again. I'll be brief and to the point. When you mention the reasonability of the accommodations, I think that we need to add some details into the things that already exist to avoid anybody saying, we have to be very, very specific. We do not want any unintentional ability for people to say, oh, I'm sorry, I misread that, I wasn't sure. So let's please be clear, let's please be concise, and let's please have everything detailed out specifically. Thank you, that's all I have.
Understood, and I apologize for having to rush everyone. I know we have a lot of discussions here. We do have one member of the public, Jenny Jordan, who I'd like to invite to come off mute and come on camera if you're in a place to do so, Jenny.
Great. Thank you so much for the robust discussion. My name is Jenny Jordan. I happen to work for the healthcare policy and financing, but I am here more as a parent and a person with family members with disabilities. I really appreciate all of the time and discussion, and especially the emphasis on the physical environment and navigating that in spaces. I would also like to raise the electronic or the technology navigation, recognizing that for any of us potentially in a lot of these public offices, you're going to be using technology in some fashion. So making sure that there are also those accommodations being considered and in place, whether that's note-taking, whether it's speech to text. There's a lot of potentially lower cost accommodations, but that are just as important and valuable. So making sure that those sorts of accommodations can be also weighed, that people don't only think of the physical accommodations, but it can be the full package for what people might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I will need 3 minutes to close us out with next steps. That means I've got about 3 minutes. I didn't know how long public comment would take. Do we have any members, as we get ready to close this conversation for today only, on specific actionable, implementable, and enforceable steps the state may want to take to remove barriers to running for or serving in office? Mr. Ortiz.
Thank you, guys. I just want to bring up a couple of other issues that you guys should consider as a subcommittee, as I cannot specifically make recs. One that came up around the web access is that if there's an individual in the legislature that lives with a print disability, as it currently stands, there is no way for them to access amendments that happen on the fly or on the floor. This was an issue that was discussed when we were revamping the web access bill. This is something that needs to be addressed if we're going to have people that are blind or that are print disabled to be able to serve and run for office. That's number one. The other thing that I want the committee to consider around the web participation as a kind of workaround is consider making a recommendation that if a department or if an entity that is responsible for engaging with the public does not allow for virtual participation of constituents, then they cannot allow their able-bodied staff to participate in work or in meetings as a way to put an additional pressure on these entities to make virtual participation possible. So those are my points.
And as I have done before, I will ask subcommittee members if anyone would like to include the items Mr. Ortiz just referenced about the web and print accessibility and other items he raised there. Mr. Hines, Mr. Toller, is that you advancing those ideas? Excellent. Thank you all. Anyone else want to offer thoughts for right now? Okay, let me just circle back and remind everyone of the process. Carrie, as my amazing colleague, has been taking scrupulous notes. We've also been messaging back and forth on the ideas you all had identified that I read off at the start of the meeting. We're going to clean those up over the next week, share them back out with you in case that you want to make sure we've got the language right. I will also invite each of you. If you're like me, you're going to sit down at the dinner table and say, you know what I should have said? Email me those. Send me those ideas, ideally between now and Monday, and we'll get those included in that clean write-up we do. What we'll want to do is get that clean list to you, get your feedback, and then quickly get it up on Engage Dora, at which point, as we started teeing up last month, we're going to ask all of you to reach out to your networks, as we'll be doing with all of the other subcommittees in the Exec Council, to start getting stakeholders weighing in on those. We won't be asking the stakeholders to vote yes or no, or say I support or oppose. What we will be doing is asking them What are the strengths you see in this, in addressing the barriers? What concerns or implications do you see? And what else might we want to consider as we refine these recommendations? Again, what we're putting out to stakeholders is not recommendations that you all have agreed upon. It's ideas we've surfaced. We'll get that stakeholder feedback and we'll workshop them. Before I make my final remarks, Carrie, is there anything you want to cover on scheduling?
Yeah, I just want to note that our July meeting is currently scheduled on July 4th. So in observance of Independence Day, we will be rescheduling that. But one of the points also, you guys are all wonderful. The only subcommittee that has filled out their survey entirely for a mini retreat in July. So thank you for that. The most reasonable times, everybody was able to do in person with enough notice. So the most reasonable time seemed to be between 10 and 2 or 12 and 4. Barrick and I will put together kind of a quick scheduling poll to see if we can find an agreeable time for everyone to meet. And of course, we will take all requests for accommodations into account and find a great place for us all to get together in person.
Thank you, Carrie. And as a final note, I'm going to go completely off script and off topic, though I think as you all are having conversations about ensuring the rights of all Coloradans, it's appropriate. And Mr. Ortiz, I believe I saw in your 1-inch video the AA tag there on your shirt for the All-American, the Army's Airborne Soldiers. And it's impossible for me to sit here as I think of those who 80 years ago jumped onto Normandy Beach to fight for freedom and the rights of everyone around the world, to not thank Mr. Ortiz for his service to the country, to thank all of you for continuing that fight and making sure that not only are we fighting for everyone all around the world, but we continue to make sure that every right is there for every American and every Coloradan. So on this day, I want to recognize that greatest generation, and I want to thank all of you for continuing the spirit of that work, for ensuring that here. On that, as Carrie said, we'll follow up with all of you on scheduling and to make sure we got the language of this right. But I want to really thank all of you. I know it's been a long road through talking about barriers and ideas and listening to folks. I feel like we got some really actionable and tangible ideas on the table today. At our next meeting, we'll shift to some that are going to overlap as we talk about working for government. And I think some of these same accommodation issues are going to be there, but we're going to want to then start talking about everything from the job notification to the application to the onboarding and everything involved in working for government. We've got a great start here. I thank all of you. We will see you at some date to be determined following the 4th of July. And with that, thank you all for the time this afternoon.